Welcome to the Canon Connected, where we read the connections, see the connections, and study the connections of the Bible. It is day number 32 of the Canon Connected, and if you've been following along with us since the beginning of the year, today is the first day that the day does not match up with the day of the calendar. If you're newer and you haven't been following along since the beginning, we still welcome you, but if you have been with us since January 1, for the first time, you are actually going to have a day that does not correspond to the day of the calendar in January. It's February 1st for many of you, but if it's not, whatever day you're listening to this, we're so glad to have you along for the ride through the Bible in a very unique way of studying it with connected passages. And right now, we're in a series of themes that have to do with God and fire. God destroyed Sodom and Gomorrah with fire, and it is not something that just happened, very by happen chance or was coincidental. It is very obvious from the second day that we studied this a couple of days ago that God used fire a lot. He promised to never destroy the world again by flood, but he did use fire and has used fire many times throughout biblical history. And then yesterday we saw even how God, by his nature, we can even say an attribute of God or a characteristic of God, by his nature, he is a consuming fire. It's not just that God unleashes fire, but it's one way that we understand him. Consuming or devouring fire is part of many passages we saw in the Old Testament, and it describes something about God that is important for us to understand, and that is how we do need to stand in awe and fear of him and even worship him with trembling. But that leads us again into today, where we're going to start a 2-day series on hell. And it's not just, again, random passages. It's not like I just, plugged in the word hell into a search engine and just found passages that had that word. Again, these studies are planned very purposefully to study things that do connect. And you may not have seen this today. I have no idea how many listeners I have or what your biblical background is, because hell comes up sometimes even in pop culture with famous pastors and Christians. It's caused people to have heard teachings on what the Valley of Hinnom was in the Old Testament and how to explain it. And so you may have heard this before, and if not, and you read the readings today and you weren't sure how any of this had anything to do with Jesus' teaching on hell, then it'll be an honor for me to be the first person to tell you that the word that Jesus used, in the passages today, and there are other words used for hell in the New Testament, and there's at least 3 that I know of. One of them's Hades, pretty popular word in American English. That's the one from Luke 16. But Jesus used the word, and it put in English letters, it's Gehenna, and it comes from, because there's a language difference, and I'm not here to get into a lot of technical language jargon, but just this, it's important for this one time, at least to make this connection. Jesus' word for hell in the passages today, and there are other words used as well, but the ones you read today come from that Valley of Hinnom. All right, it's the same word that Jesus used in all the passages today, and his half-brother, I presume, writing in James 3:6, used that same word. So let's dive right in. The Valley of Hinnom is something that comes up a lot. You read several passages today. So since it is a basis for Jesus talking about hell, which is a pretty crucial Christian doctrine, however we describe it, whatever we think it's like, it is very important to at least go back to the core of what the teaching on hell are. And so I really think it is important for us, because Jesus used the word from the Valley of Hinnom in his language as he was speaking at the time, or at least as the New Testament writers wrote it, that we understand what the Valley of Hinnom was. So I gave you as many passages today as I could find on what this valley was, and they are very instructive. They describe it very graphically and with great detail. So let's look at them. 2 Chronicles 28, Ahaz, wicked king. Most of the kings in the Old Testament were wicked. Ahaz is definitely among the bottom ones, was 20 years old when he began to reign, and he reigned 16 years in Jerusalem, and he did not do what was right in the eyes of the Lord, as his father David had done. Not his literal father, but his ancestor. That's definitely used often in the Bible, father as ancestor, instead of one generation. But he walked in the ways of the kings of Israel, who were all wicked, perhaps with the exception of Jehu. He made metal images for the Baals, and he made offerings in the valley of the son of Hinnom, and burned his sons as an offering according to the abominations of the nations whom God had drove out before the people of Israel. So he did the same thing the false god people had done before. He just adopted their ways. It's really one of the dangers and we'll have a reading on this later this year, of whenever we are unequally yoked with people, not even just in marriage, but when we have relationships that are too close. Old Testament history is filled with God's people doing the same things that false God peoples did, and with idolatry and rebellion. And this is one of them, offering children as sacrifices, burning them. And it says in verse 4, and he sacrificed and made offerings on the high places and on the hills and under every green tree. Grandson Manasseh, 2 Chronicles 33, was 12 years old when he began to reign, and he reigned 55 years in Jerusalem. And he did what was evil in the sight of the Lord. This is going to sound very similar, but believe it or not, it's not the same king. And he did what was evil in the sight of the Lord, according to the abominations of the nations whom the Lord drove out before the people of Israel. For he rebuilt the high places that his father Hezekiah had broken down. Very fascinating that Ahaz had a son who was righteous, Ahab wicked, Hezekiah righteous, and now we have a son Manasseh who's also wicked. Although we read later in his story he was forgiven at the end of his life. We'll read that in a connected reading on grace. But it's just funny how, maybe not funny, but interesting funny how you can have generations and you can have a righteous or unrighteous grandfather, a righteous father, and an unrighteous son. That's what happened here with Manasseh, and he's more like his grandfather Ahaz than his father Hezekiah. For he rebuilt the high places the Lord drove out before the people of Israel, for he had rebuilt the high places his father Hezekiah had broken down, and he erected altars to the Baals and made Ashtaroth. Those are the two big false gods, maybe not the two biggest, but among the biggest, Baal and Ashtaroth in the Old Testament, false gods, idols, and worshipped all the host of heaven and served them. And that sounds kind of spiritual, host of heaven, but here it probably means something like stars. And so, no, we are not supposed to worship nature. We worship God through nature, but we don't worship the sun and moon and the stars. And he built altars in the house of the Lord, which the Lord had said, in Jerusalem my name shall be forever. And that's just utterly wicked. When you replace God's name, in essence his character, with a false god, it's just reprehensible. It's abominable. God hates it. And it says, and he built altars for the host of heaven in the two courts of the house of the Lord, and he burned his sons as an offering in the valley of the son of Hinnom, and used fortune-telling and omens and sorcery, and dealt with mediums and with necromancers. So we see the same behavior as his grandfather. Jeremiah 7 is the same thing. It also references the valley of Hinnom. And I'll skip down to verse 31, and they have built the high places of Topheth, which is in the valley of the son of Hinnom, to burn their sons and daughters in the fire, which I did not command, nor did it come into my mind. Therefore, behold, the days are coming, declares the Lord, when it will no more be called Topheth, or the valley of the son of Hinnom, but the valley of slaughter. For they will bury in Topheth, because there is no room elsewhere, and the dead bodies of the people will be food for the birds and the air and the beasts of the field, and none of them will frighten away. This is also interesting in this passage, how God says this to Jeremiah, and he says this repeatedly, about how the people were so wicked, he tells Jeremiah to stop praying for them. That's how wicked these people were, and it's tied to their practices in the valley of the son of Hinnom, which again was not just in Jeremiah's context a place where sons and daughters were burned, but again where there was mass slaughter and burials of people and mass fire and burning as a result of killing. This again matters to us understanding what Jesus meant whenever he referred to hell with a very specific word in the New Testament, in my humble opinion. Jeremiah 19 is the same thing. It says in verse 6, therefore, behold, days are coming, declares the Lord, when this place shall no longer be called Topheth, or the valley of the son of Hinnom. This is a different passage. It sounds the same, right? But the valley of slaughter, and in this place I will make void the plans of Judah and Jerusalem, and will cause the people to fall by the sword before their enemies, and by the hand of those who seek their life. So it's a place of God's judgment. God basically changed it from people committing sin and burning their sons and daughters and committing these abominations to a place where he destroyed people, and he cast them into this, not valley of Hinnom now, but the valley, he called it valley of slaughter, where God's judgment is unleashed. This definitely matters to me in understanding what Jesus meant with Gehenna in the New Testament. Jeremiah 32, the last one from the valley of Hinnom in the Old Testament. For the children of Israel and the children of Judah have done nothing but evil in my sight from their youth. The children of Israel have done nothing but provoke me to anger by the work of their hands, declares the Lord. The city has aroused my anger and wrath from the day it was built to this day. So I will remove it from my sight because of all the evil in the children of Israel and the children of Judah that they did to provoke me to anger. Their kings, their officials, their priests, and their prophets, the men of Judah and the inhabitants of Jerusalem. They have turned their back on me and not their face. And though I have taught them persistently, Again, God is very slow to anger, slow to wrath, okay? He tried. God always tries. He always pursues. He never in a moment just, judges people, for without showing patience first. They set up abominations in the house that is called by my name to defile it. We saw this previously in the Chronicles book. This is what the people did. They took the things of God, the holy things, the things that were meant to show his presence and his glory, and they replaced him. Of course, this is going to make God angry. They built the high places of Baal in the valley of the son of Hinnom. Why? Well, we've seen it many times, but here it is again, to offer up their sons and daughters to Molech, the god of child sacrifice, though I did not command it, nor did it enter my mind that they should do this abomination to cause Judah to sin. Repeating basically what the first passages were saying. But the other Jeremiah passages let us know God changed the name of it to Valley of Slaughter, a place of his judgment, where they had burned their sons and daughters as child sacrifice. And so, in the New Testament, in these passages we read, when Jesus says, "For it is better that you lose one of the members than that your whole body be thrown into hell," he is referring back to this Valley of Hinnom. I think that's clear. I don't think there's any way around that. The debate, I think, sometimes comes up of what the Valley of Hinnom was, and to me, the passages explain it clearly. I guess there could be some debate there about exactly what it means whenever Jesus says this, but I think the reference to God's destruction and the fact that it became the Valley of Slaughter and it was a place where bodies were burned, I think again was supposed to be part of the imagery and so part of the teachings. So Jesus teaches in Matthew 18 similar to what he taught Matthew 5, and he shows that same teaching, same idea. And if your eye causes you to sin, tear it out and throw it away. It is better for you to enter life with one eye than two eyes and to be thrown into the hell of fire. And he's even, more clear about the imagery of fire. The fire from the Valley of Hinnom, that's clear from the Old Testament passages, is part of the teaching here. He makes it doubly clear. And then Matthew 10:26, Matthew 23, 13 through 39. These passages all are places where Jesus is referencing hell, God's judgment, and he's referring back to that valley where God's people, to their great shame and to great scorn from God, sacrificed children in the fire. One of the secondary thing, by the way, the last connection there would be James 3. James is the only other person in the New Testament. Paul talked about hell a lot, and Jesus even used other words for hell, like in Luke 16, Hades. But the other words for hell, and Peter did as well, in the New Testament are not this word, but except for this one, James 3:6. And the tongue is a fire, automatically putting that imagery in our head. A world of unrighteousness. The tongue is set among our members, staining the whole body, setting on fire the entire course of life, and set on fire by hell. Gehenna, the Valley of Hinnom. The other connection I wanted you to see was when Jesus taught about hell, he used this phrase where the worm dies not and the fire is not quenched. You saw that in several passages today, and I wanted you to see that Jesus didn't just come up with this off the top of his head. It was not a new truth that he gave, because Jesus is the Word, the truth of God in human form. He could have said anything and it would have been true. But Jesus was the master teacher as far as pointing back to God's Word being the Old Testament. How many times have we seen this year? That things that you may think are new to the New Testament, Jesus even explaining, that I'm going to divide people. I'm going to set a mother-in-law against her daughter-in-law. That came from the book of Micah. In the same way, where the worm dies not and the fire is not quenched is an Old Testament reference. You can see it in Isaiah 66 and in Ezekiel 20, 45 through 49. So this is an affirmation again that we need to know the Old Testament. It's not something to be discarded or considered antiquated or old or out of date. The Old Testament is the foundation for everything that the New Testament teaches. Jesus is in every page, every verse, every syllable. And even when it's not about Jesus per se, it is definitely connected to something Jesus taught. And so in Isaiah 66, which begins, by the way, "For as the new heavens and new earth that I will make shall remain before me," reference to Revelation 21, John, when he's describing Revelation, and whenever he's describing heaven in Revelation 21 and 22, also is not coming up with new things. He got most everything he said from Isaiah. Jesus, same thing here. He is pointing his listeners back to Isaiah and Ezekiel. And man, those books are long. They have so many verses. Ezekiel is so strange at times. We're not supposed to view them that way. We need to know those books so that we can understand what Jesus was saying. And so the context here takes us back to these strong connections, direct quotes. A lot of times the New Testament comes from allusions or just things that, have echoes of things from the Old Testament. But a lot of times this is straightforward quotes, and that's what we see here. So the two big connections again, Gehenna, hell in the New Testament that Jesus used. Not every time. But that's a very popular word. All the passages today where that word comes from a valley of slaughter, a valley where the people had sacrificed their children, and God turned it into a valley of slaughter where he judged people. That's an important context for hell to me. And then we also see how Jesus, when he said where the worm dies not and the fire is not quenched, to describe hell, he is taking the people back to God's judgment in Isaiah 66 and Ezekiel 20. Tomorrow we're going to study the other words in the New Testament that teach about hell and try to get a more complete understanding of this idea and this concept. Again, like I've said many times, it's not a pleasant topic at all. I don't claim that it is ever. It's a very difficult topic to work through emotionally, even mentally at times, but it's important because Jesus taught on it so much. So I hope you'll come back, be with us tomorrow. We'll discuss Jesus' other teachings on hell as well as the other New Testament writers, and we will continue to read the connections, see the connections, and study the connections. Thank you.